I'm Jack Berryman, ACSM historian, and we're in Las Vegas today, and we're going to talk with Mike Spezzano as part of ACSM's Distinguished Leaders in Sports Medicine and Exercise Science video series. So, Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for stopping by and chatting a little bit. And I just wanted to start off with sort of your earlier life, high school, college, interests at the time. A lot of people already had interests in sports and exercise, and I don't know if you're like that or one of those or not, but if you could just tell me a little bit about your earlier career.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I actually grew up in a small town in Rhode Island, town of Westerly, Rhode Island, and like a lot of the people that you mentioned, I was involved in sports and physical activity and anything to do with moving around and riding bikes and playing sports, whatever season it was. My mom would tell you that I broke every window in the house, throwing baseballs and footballs and basketballs around the backyard.
No broken bones, though.
A few, actually, a few. But I was a pretty active kid, and growing up in that town, I was able to take advantage of the YMCA. So I was a kid who went to the Y. My mom and dad took me to the Y probably in first grade, and I never left.
I did the same thing.
I never left. It came to be my
Great
career.
spot, yeah.
And I think now maybe that she brought me there in an effort to channel my energy in a more
in a good way.
in a
she
more
was
productive
open.
way, yes.
Yeah.
And I just thrived there. I loved it. I was in all kinds of sports programs, in gymnastics and basketball, and I actually got involved in doing some teenage leadership programs. So I was involved helping and teaching younger kids activities and running events for the Y, and really helping in a lot of capacities. And I really thrived there, and I enjoyed it. And it ended up being my career.
Wow. Was that the whole way through junior high, high school?
Pretty much.
The whole.
Pretty much. As I got into high school, I did get into a little bit of into scholastic sports.
Yeah.
I was on the track team, and I ran, and I did some pole vaulting and a few other activities, and I really enjoyed that. Looking back now, I still run to this day, although back then it was more of the sprint distances. But I think my background in learning gymnastics at the Y really helped me in events like pole vaulting and things like that. So at that time, I got involved in more high school activities, and I was still connected to the Y, but probably less so for a few years. But we had a relatively small town, 17,000, 18,000 people, where everybody knew each other.
Sure.
And my cousin actually happened to be one of the directors at the Y, and was a very influential person in my life in terms of getting engaged in that organization and then looking at that possibly as a career.
Well, what time period would this have been?
So I graduated high school in 1972.
Okay.
So this was throughout the 60s. I mean, I was in first grade in 1960, and through most of that time, through junior high, I was involved with big family life. A lot of things with families, a lot of relatives in the area, and a lot of physical activity. And I remember going to the beach and surfing. Most people don't think of that in Rhode Island, but there is coastline there.
Yeah, sure.
So you have great memories of growing up in that town and in that area.
Yeah. So, what you decided? I'm going to college, I guess, or not?
I did decide on going to college. My family used to go to take us on vacation every year to New Hampshire, on one of the lakes in New Hampshire every summer when we got out of school, and I just loved that area.
Not Winnipesaukee.
Actually, Winnipesaukee was one of them, and Lake Ossipee, Lake Sunapee, all the different lakes region.
I'm from Pennsylvania, so
okay.
I know some of those.
So you're familiar with that area. So it's just beautiful in the summer. And I always thought I'd go to college up there. I just kind of fell in love with the area, and I actually had planned on it. When kind of an 11th hour, I was a senior in high school, and I was going to go into probably parks and recreation, because I really enjoyed the outdoors and being physical. The man who was the head of the physical education department at the YMCA, where I was still involved, was a graduate of Springfield College.
Oh,
and
know it well.
And he said to me, you should go to Springfield College.
Wow.
And he said, because you could do this for a living. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Because at that point, I'm a 17-year-old kid. I thought, playing sports and being in the gym, that was pretty good way to
And get paid for
and
it.
get paid for it, right? So,
Yeah.
so I went to Springfield College, probably late in the kind of enrollment process. It was maybe in the winter of my senior year, January, February, and I just loved it. I just loved the atmosphere. Small college, less than 3,000 students.
Great school.
Obviously, a great reputation for physical education.
And connected with the YMCA
And
for years.
It actually started, what a lot of people don't know, as the International YMCA
yeah,
Training School.
I knew it. Yeah, I know. All
Yeah,
about
they
it,
invented basketball there. The YMCA person invented
Sure,
volleyball
sure.
in that area. So it was like a dream come true. So I went to Springfield with the purpose of graduating in 4 years and working for the YMCA.
Mhm, mhm.
So I kind of knew what I wanted to do.
So the years you were there were what?
I graduated in 1976.
Okay.
So I was there from 72 to 76, 4
Okay,
years.
Okay.
And many of my classmates at the time were interested in teaching and coaching.
Sure.
Because fitness was still relatively young. You know,
Mhm.
the Cooper book came out in the late 60s and jogging was popular, but it wasn't obviously like it is today. It was really the beginning of the fitness movement. And, you know, most of the coursework at Springfield at the time was physical education. So it was
Mhm.
focused on teaching PE in schools
Yeah.
and coaching sports. And there was maybe 1 or 2 classes that had to do with either community recreation or community organizations like the YMCA, or I think they called it PE and social agencies.
Mhm. Did you remember a gymnast there about your time named Ben Artizzoni?
I do not. I know he may not have
Because
been.
I went to a little school like Springfield called Lock Haven in Pennsylvania, a big wrestling school.
I thought you were going to say Slippery Rock, actually.
Same idea.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to UMass in Amherst. So I was in Amherst from 69 to 74.
Same time period.
Yeah, and one of the grad students from one of the students from Springfield came there.
Ah,
And
okay.
his name was Ben Artizzoni. Because I thought he may have crossed paths with him.
You know, it's interesting you say
So-
that. One of the things I learned at Springfield was a lot about what I would say minor sports, you know,
Mhm.
because obviously basketball, football, baseball, but
Football,
also,
yeah.
but lacrosse, wrestling,
Absolutely.
even gymnastics and swimming. I had very little exposure to that. It was a
Mhm.
whole new world going to Springfield, and just, you know, the type of person I went there was generally a person who was going to end up in a human service organization, whether it's teaching or working for a
Mhm.
not-for-profit organization or social agency. And just a great spirit, and I loved it. I thrived. I had great grades. I graduated magna cum laude, and you know, and I was probably an average student in high school. I did enough to get by, but you know, I really fell in
Found
love.
something-
I really did.
yeah.
Fell in love with it.
So did you end up at a YMCA then, or not?
I actually did.
Oh, great.
Because of the connection with YMCA's, they would
Yes.
have a lot of on-campus interviews.
Yeah.
So YMCA directors would come and interview prospective seniors for jobs, and
Mhm.
it's a relatively funny story. It's funny now, but it wasn't at the time, of how I ended up in my first job. I interviewed for a couple of different YMCA's, and you know, I also got married and had a child in high school. So my
Oh, in
wife.
high school?
I'm sorry, in college.
Okay, just
Yeah,
clarifying.
yeah, so thank you. We were talking about college. In college.
Yes.
So, you know, my wife and I had gone on a few trips looking at different YMCA's, mostly in the Northeast area. And I interviewed for one YMCA, probably an assistant physical education director job at a small town in Connecticut, New Canaan, Connecticut.
Mhm.
And I was one of the finalists for that. So I interviewed on campus, and they had me come down to the Y. And they had picked 2 candidates, one recent college graduate, and that was me, and one person with about 2 or 3 years of
Oh,
experience. And they weren't sure which way to go, but they had a finalist either way. During the time they were deciding, there's a YMCA right across the border of New York, Connecticut, and White Plains. And they were apparently were buddies, the 2 physical education directors. And the White Plains guy was looking for a staff. And he asked the Connecticut person, do you have anyone? He said, well, I have 2 people, and
Oh.
I'll let you know the one I don't choose.
I'll be darned.
So that was me.
I'll be darned.
I-
You could have won in that deal too, because White Plains is a pretty neat place.
I actually did win. It
Yeah.
ended up being a fantastic experience.
That's
You
what I
know,
would
so I didn't
guess.
get the job in New Canaan, but
Yeah.
you know, virtually the next day, the guy in White Plains called me. I went there. He offered me the job. It was a fantastic position. I stayed there for almost 7 years, working
Wow.
in a lot of different fitness programs. It's really where I cut my teeth, and honestly, it's where I kind of developed my reputation and learned how to do training. And I really learned more about fitness there than I ever did in college,
I'll be darned. Wow.
because there was mostly physical education and sports in college at
Yes,
that time.
Yeah. Was there someone there that you learned more from, or was it just pretty much self-taught at White Plains?
It's from my boss. The guy who hired me
Okay.
was the head of physical
Okay.
education and
Okay.
fitness, and his name was Len Rosewarren.
Okay.
Since retired from the Y, he's now living in Florida, and he and I keep in touch a little bit. But he hired me and put me in charge of a relatively, not relatively, I guess relatively new program, but a really strong program that they call the Cardiovascular Health Program.
Oh,
This was 1976.
yeah, that's right at the when that's getting going.
And he
Yeah.
had a group of probably 300, mostly men, because that Y at the time was all men. I mean, it seems really crazy to talk about now, and
No,
now
I
it's fully
remember it.
co-ed.
I remember it very well.
And we had a few women that would come into class, and it's since been fully integrated. But he put me in charge of that program.
Was that more prevention or rehab or both?
It was
or what?
prevention.
Okay.
It was exclusively prevention.
So middle-aged men, basically.
Almost exclusively middle-aged
Yeah,
men.
yeah.
And they had started a program with my predecessor and a fitness director there who since went on to be the fitness director at one of the first corporate fitness programs at General Foods, which is based in White Plains. And they developed this program that really grown, came to be known as the Joggers Program because most of what they did was jog around the streets of White Plains in the early morning. And I was put in charge of that program, and it was intimidating as heck.
This is mid-70s.
This was June, July '76.
Okay.
Because I never really was taught how to teach a fitness class in college.
Mhm.
So I learned from him. You know, I kind of mentored under him for a little bit, and then one day he said, "Hey, it's your turn. You go teach the class." And I was
Okay.
pretty scared. I mean, here are all these, and White Plains. Well, it was a significant business area. Now, you know, looking back, and many corporate executives, many people who would commute into New York
It's
City.
pretty upper class then, I'm sure.
So I had in my classes vice presidents for IBM, which
Yeah.
had their headquarters just north in Armonk, just north of New York City.
Yeah.
You know, General Foods executives, people that were working on Wall Street that would live in White Plains and commute in.
Yeah, sure.
And I didn't know any of this. You know, they were just a bunch of my joggers. You know?
Right, right.
So I was really in the right place at the right time in the
Absolutely.
fitness business. I
Yeah.
really learned a lot about fitness, relatively young. I had a couple of Y mentors that who were in other positions, kind of with the national office, but regionally based, that I became to know and became mentors to me and gave me opportunities to do some training with other Y staff and to kind of broaden my my perspective, because all I knew of the Y at that point was my Y.
Yeah.
Didn't really know there was a national organization and all these other resources available.
Did you know of ACSM at the time?
I did know of it, and I've been a member now for many years, and I'm a volunteer on their summit planning committee. Spoken at the summit a number of times, but I thought I couldn't join ACSM.
I've heard that before because I'm not a doctor.
I wasn't a doctor.
Yeah,
I didn't have an advanced degree. I have a BS
That
in
was
physical
definitely
education.
a problem at the time, and most of the time, if you did join a group, it was either with the YMCA or AFERD.
That's right.
At that time, we weren't looking towards ACSM.
That's right. And the Y had a pretty strong society. It was called the Physical Education Society.
Yeah.
And it was a great, much like ACSM, although they didn't do the research and the publication and all that ACSM does, but a lot of great networking and relationship opportunities through that. And I really thrived through that and got to know a lot of people, had a lot of opportunities come my way because of that.
So you were at White Plains, you said 7 years, I think.
7 years.
What was the next stop?
So the next stop was a YMCA in Springfield, Massachusetts. So
Back to
back to
Springfield.
Springfield, but working for the Y there this time instead of
Okay.
going to school. So there was a more an advanced position, a little more pay, supervising a department instead of running just health and fitness. I had other programs under me, all of the kind of the adult membership and the adult programs, including fitness and sports and a lot of others. So broader responsibility, different kind of a challenge. And I was there only about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years, because I realized at the time that it wasn't the right position for me. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a great experience, a good Y, great city to live in. My kids were kind of getting at school age by then, so we spent some of their formative years there. But what I realized, what I really wanted to do, I guess after now I'm 10 years into the Y, I had an epiphany
Yeah,
of sorts.
yeah.
That what I really like to do is to write and to present and to train. So I was looking for opportunities that would give me a chance to use those skills. You know, I had spent a lot of time on the fitness floor, teaching classes and you know, teaching swimming lessons. When you're in the Y, you kind of do everything.
In the trenches,
In
so
the
to
trenches,
speak.
and I was looking for more. So I was there only 3 years, and I started looking around for other opportunities. And what I found was the New York City YMCA. So if you had told me that I was going to work in New York City, I would have told you you're crazy. You know, it's just really intimidating. And I've got 2 little kids. Where are we going to live? And they have to go to school. And someone in New York, the gentleman who eventually hired me, had me come down and see the YMCA's because it's the biggest YMCA system in the world. It's a huge operation, and now it's a $150 million plus operation, 21 or 22 branches in the 5 boroughs of New York. At the time, it wasn't quite that big, but it was still fairly large. And they had an association office that kind of ran the operations for all the branches. So I was offered a position at the association office to help with program management, specifically in fitness. And at the time, they were looking at generating corporate fitness clients and corporate memberships, but also the New York City Y had developed a program through a gentleman by the name of Al Melleby and Dr. Hans Kraus, who's very well known.
I know of Kraus, yeah, absolutely.
Called the Wise Healthy Back Program. So they had developed this program called the Wise Healthy Back.
For lower back
For
pain.
low back pain. Very
Absolutely.
basic exercise, recommended by Kraus.
Yeah.
A very effective program. Over 300,000 people had taken it. And I had actually been trained in it as an instructor years ago. But as it turned out, Al, who was an employee of the Y of Greater New York, was retiring. So in my new position, I absorbed being the national director for the Y Healthy Back Program.
Wow.
So that was pretty interesting.
Timing again, right?
Time and again. So I had that program.
And what year was that?
That was 1982. No, I'm sorry, 86.
Okay.
86. So 10 years after I started there.
Okay.
So in that role, I was able to train YMCA instructors all across the country.
To go out and
All across the
and
country.
replicate this.
So yeah, teach
Yeah.
them the protocol for the exercise program and the Kraus-Weber tests, which
Sure.
everyone is familiar with,
Yeah.
which the program utilized, and Al and Dr. Kraus's book that was had the exercises in it, and that was a fairly significant part of my job. Now you need to understand that the Y of the USA, which is the national headquarters of the Y, is based in Chicago, and they see their job as primarily providing resources like that to Ys across the country. Now, local Ys, like New York City Ys, don't typically do that. But New York City was they were big enough to kind of flex their muscles and say, hey, look, we've got this healthy back program, we own it, we're going to
And
make
they
it
didn't
available
feel
to
like
Y.
you were stepping on their toes.
No, they
maybe a little bit, but New York's New York.
And
right?
they kind of, they let it happen, and the New York Y did a good job of managing it, I must say. But eventually, in my role there at the New York City Y, where I was now from '86 until '94, so that's 8 years. So probably in the middle of that time frame, I began to transition the program to YMCA of the USA. The demands for my time had grown within the New York City, so within the association and helping the branch in New York City. So it was time to give that program to Y of the USA. So there's more to come on that as the story continues.
Yeah, we've got to step up.
Okay, sorry.
Well, no, I like to ask questions, and I have another one. Did you get to do any of the writing you wanted to do? in New
Not at
York?
that point, but that's coming.
All right, we better move on then.
So, back when I was at White Plains, I discovered that there was a Y of the USA, and I met a gentleman, Bill Zudi, Dr. Zudi, who was pretty involved in the fitness movement in America, who was the National Director of Health and Fitness at the Y of the USA. And I had no idea such a position existed. And when I learned of that, I said, that's the job I want one day.
Wow.
So in 1994, I was in New York, that job became vacant. I applied for it, and I got it.
Wow.
So
great. That's a
it was a
that's
big
a
move.
plum there, yeah.
So I was really, really enthused about it.
And you had to go to Chicago.
So we had to relocate, my family to Chicago. By this time, my daughter's in college. My son was a senior in high school.
That's tough at that.
Well,
age.
I had to negotiate that I couldn't move to Chicago until he graduated.
Yeah,
I couldn't,
I understand. Yeah, that's
move
tough.
there.
Yeah.
So I was able to to go to Chicago, and I actually lived in a YMCA of the Chicago, and there's a big YMCA downtown Chicago on Chicago Avenue called the Lawson House. I had a room there for a year and a half, and I could go back and forth, so my wife
Yeah.
and son stayed home in
That's
New
doable.
Jersey,
That's doable.
so he could finish school, and then we moved to the Chicago area. So working at the YFDUSA was a dream come true. So I was the National Director of Health and Fitness
Wow.
for the YMCA, where I was in charge of developing all of the resources for health and fitness for YMCA's. That included manual writing, development, training, developing training programs in fitness classes and
Boy,
fitness
that's
courses.
a huge undertaking.
And a lot of that was then training, a cadre of trainers so they could replicate that all across the country. It's 2,600 Ys, so
Yeah.
I had to have this team of volunteer trainers that helped me to disseminate information.
Did people come to Chicago for training, or did you guys go out, or how did that work?
It was more regionally based. Most of it was not in Chicago.
Okay.
Once in a while, we'd have a major event and people would come, like when we were rolling something out. But for the most part, what we did was train a group of trainers that were working for local Y, so they could run regionally held workshops
Yeah.
and seminars.
Yeah.
So it was less cost to local Ys. They didn't have to send people,
Right.
in some places long distances
Mhm.
to Chicago. So it was a great system, and there was a lot of different program content. So I had health and fitness. There was also a similar setup for aquatics and youth
Sure.
sports and
Yeah.
child care.
Yeah.
So a lot of the products and programs you would think of in a Y. So you pretty much had your program area, and you were in charge of kind of being a consultant to 2,600 Ys, as
Yeah.
well as developing all the
Wow.
resources.
Wow, that must have been exciting.
It was really exciting, and as I look back now, some of the proudest things that I think that I can point to in my career was the development of a brand new set of training and certification courses, 33 different courses, completely revamped the exercise instructor training, developing the first personal training program for YMCA's, developing new certifications in things like kickboxing exercise and Pilates and group cycling, things that they had never had before. I was able to, with the help of a lot of people, develop those.
So where are you now?
So after the Y of the USA, I went to New York City, back to New York City as a vice president in a new position they created for 5 years, from 2006 until just last year. When that got me to 35 years in the YMCA,
Wow.
and I decided to retire. So my wife and I had an apartment in New York, and my son by this time is married in Chicago, and he and his wife started having kids.
Yeah, now I
now-
have grandkids too. I know where you're going next.
Yeah, so grandkids changed the whole equation.
Absolutely.
So at the point in my career where I could retire from the Y and continue to do some program consulting and fitness consulting on my own, and go back to Chicago. So in the last year, that's what I've done. I've started doing some consulting, and fully retired from the Y. We're close enough now to where we see my son and his wife and the 2 kids on a regular basis,
Yeah, that's great.
and both my wife and I figured that was of primary importance in our life at this
Yeah,
point, and
yeah.
you
That's
only
where my wife and I are too. Same,
Yeah?
same
Uh-huh.
spot. Yeah. So yeah, we're really flying here. So last thing, you got involved with the summit. I can see why now. Gee, you're the perfect person. What are you doing now at the summit? And you said you started a few years ago, right? And
Yes.
So if you could just tell me a little bit about your program here, basically.
Okay, so in my role at YVUSA, I was a liaison to ACSM.
Oh,
And
I didn't. Okay.
So I
okay.
maintained that relationship, which is a fantastic relationship.
Yeah.
ACSM was a great organization to work with. The Y uses a lot of their recommendations in terms of what they recommend local Ys to do to follow ACSM guidelines and recommendations. So the folks at ACSM, Jim Whitehead and the staff there, had gotten me engaged in a number of things, including putting me on the Summit Program Committee
Oh, perfect.
for the first summit.
Wow,
with
that's
Larry-
like 15 years ago. Or something
It
like
was,
that.
exactly,
With
with Larry
Larry
Golding.
Golding?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Larry was a longtime friend and consultant to the
YMCA.
Y, right?
Yeah.
And I really got to credit Larry as a mentor, and he really, I'm sure behind the scenes, pushed for me to be involved. And I was on the summer program committee for actually 10 years in a row.
Wow.
And I spoke at most of them on different training programs and fitness. And during my tenure, the last time in New York, I was so consumed there, I really didn't have time for outside activities. So this is the first year I'm back since probably 2006 at the summit. I was actually at the summit in 2006 when I got a call from New York City, asking me to apply for the job.
Oh, gee.
Little piece of trivia.
Yeah, right. Well,
So-
anyhow, that's, oh, wow.
So I really enjoy being on the program committee. I
Yeah.
think I bring the kind of the reality of a community-based organization along with my colleagues in more in an academic setting,
Yeah.
and help kind of structure the program aimed at the young people and all the people working in health and fitness today.
And you've done it all. I mean, you've sort of been there and done that somewhere along the way, so.
Certainly seems that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Mike, thank you. That was really neat. I
Yeah.
wish we had a little more time, but 30 minutes just goes.